strength. It's not what you think. Lots of times in our culture we think that the strong one is the most powerful one. Meaning the one who can fight the hardest, the longest, who can take out the most of his opponents. That strength literally is being able to win battles, to conquer. When you look at the Bible, when you look at the greatest character in the Bible, you have to back off of that philosophy and realize that strength is not. It's not brute force. It's not conquering. It's not controlling. It has nothing to do with conquering and controlling. Strength in the Bible is about putting the truth before the people so that they can think about it and decide. See, lots of times in the world's idea of strength, it is someone else taking a superior place and making things happen. Controlling, being in charge. And we think of strength as the person who can come in and set things right, get things rolling, fix stuff. But when we look at the life of Jesus Christ, He doesn't come in and control anything. He doesn't force anyone. He doesn't even manipulate anyone. Motivate, never manipulate. Never coerce. Never put guilt trips on people. You just don't see Jesus doing that. You see Jesus standing up for truth, living truth, speaking truth, and laying down His life to demonstrate truth. And you find that He is the strongest of all. I mentioned in the children's story, Gandhi. What made Gandhi great was not that he was a military ruler. What made him great was not that he had strings that he could pull. It wasn't even who Gandhi knew that made Gandhi great. See, these are all the things that we try to do in our attempt to manipulate and manage our lives, our attempt to try and get things to go our way. We do all kinds of things to try and manage. What was it that made Gandhi great? Was something called non-violent resistance. He went to places where power and authority was forcing and squelching and killing and destroying, and he stood there to protest that with his arms by his side, so that blows were landed on him and he did not retaliate. He just took it. But in taking it, it was such a compelling visual that it had such power. And the world was never the same. You see the same type of approach in Martin Luther King, where instead of fighting back fist with fist, he pointed out truth and then let the falsehood prove the truth correct. We see Jesus. And we see the power of Jesus in that He fought falsehood with truth in a way that honored the truth. I want you to check in with me the life of Paul. Grab open your Bibles, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and we're going to go through a few verses here in 1 Corinthians. Paul, he starts talking about the power of God, and we're going to look into that as we go through this section. But he is taking his lead from Jesus. Paul, in his life, he wanted to make sure that he didn't just fight for truth and fight for righteousness, but that he fought with the right weapons and with the right strategy. You know, if you watch movies and read books and see how the world tends to fight, it's always with violence. And it's always in an attempt to be stronger so that you can violently put down the opposition as quickly as possible. That makes you good in that you stop the fighting. Instead of fighting for a year, you go in and with your superior power and bravado, you go and you squelch the uprising and you move on. But it's always a power move. A power move. Is that what Jesus did when he came here to earth? A power move? Was that how Jesus stood up against Lucifer, that angel turned Satan? Was that how God beat Satan? Or was that the very accusation that Lucifer had against God, that God was on a power trip and that he would squelch anybody who didn't agree with him? The fact is that the truth is what was revealed in Jesus Christ when he laid down, put his arms out, and allowed himself to be nailed to a cross by the very coercive force of Satan himself. He demonstrated his love. He demonstrated the power of love, pure love. Here's what we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 17. For Christ did not send me, Paul, to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with the wisdom of words. And that's one of the things I want you to focus in here. Not the wisdom of words. Paul didn't come in to wow people with his literary, his speechifying ability to preach. Paul didn't want to come into a place and have people follow him and listen to him and become Christians because of his delivery. In fact, he didn't want them to follow him at all. In this verse, he's saying, I don't want you to follow me because of the wisdom of my words, lest the cross of Christ should be made of no effect. See, what Paul was wanting to do is he was wanting to highlight the right thing. Not the man, the message. Not the man, the message. Never follow the man. Never allow people to follow you. Follow the message. Look at this. For the message of the cross is foolishness. Was Paul calling it foolishness? No. Here it says that if you look at the cross, you're going to see something there that doesn't make sense. And unless you get to the place where you could gain understanding of what really was at stake and how God was really bringing things together, it's not going to be able to save you. There's something here this morning that I want to do, and I want to just spend some time understanding this message of the cross. I don't want it to remain foolishness to me because that means I'll be among the perishing. Fact is, I want to get in touch with the power of God. That's what I want. I want to hook up to this power of God. See, if you put this together, the message of the cross is the power of God. The cross is Christ's crowning moment. The cross is what tells us what's really the truth. When we look at the cross, we're going to see something that will be a compelling message of truth. No force. I mean, Jesus doesn't come with soldiers and say be a Christian or we're slaughtering you. Never. What is compelling is that when you look at the cross and realize that Jesus, who had no sin, gave up everything to come and show you love. That does something to you. That does something to you that becomes a motivation from within that will be strong enough that you will spend your life for Him. It's the power of God. Keep your eye focused on that phrase, power of God. Dunamis is power, theos. Dunamis, theos, power of God. Paul goes on in verse 25. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men. The weakness of God is stronger than men. Now, I want you to focus for a minute on this word weakness. And what I want you to understand is that this is not the place where God is weak. This is where God is His strongest. See, it's this, Paul is trying to build this play on words, sort of, but he's trying to shatter this mentality that strength is power. And what he's saying is that strength is weakness. Okay, so you're like, you're not making any sense. How can strength be weakness? God, who is all-powerful, set that power to the side and became weak for a purpose. What was the purpose? It was to save us. So what is the most powerful thing that God has done for you? He became weak. You see, when God set power aside and He picked up weakness so that He could be killed, because you can't kill an all-powerful God. God had to set His power to the side so that He could be killed. That would be like you and I in a battle, taking all of our weapons and our armor and setting it to the side and walking out just with a t-shirt and saying, hey, go ahead. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But see, it was in God's plan that He would be killed. He set Himself up so that we could kill Him, we humans. Does that make any sense? Well, it does if you're God. And so in His weakness, we see the true strength of love. Instead of brute strength, we're talking about love, philosophy of love. Love that has skin on it. Love that bleeds and scars. Love that dies. Going on, verse 27. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things that are mighty. And the base things of the world, things which are despised, God has chosen. And the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are. To bring to nothing the things that are. God has been at work. And He's got this strategy. He's got this strategy so that we will not trust in chariots. So that we will not trust in a track record that we have laid down. All my good works? Well, they've got to count for something, right? No. We will not trust in our ability to preach, our ability to teach, our ability to live, our ability to choose, our ability to stand up for God, our ability for anything. Those are all these things that are going to be set to the side. Now let's look at the conclusion here. So that no flesh should glory in His presence. Let's try to figure out what that means. Here we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 29. So that no flesh, that's you and me, should glory when we're in His presence. It's so that we will realize that our only hope is in Him, and that we will draw especially near, so that we will let nothing between, no work, no play, no people. How do you fight the good fight of faith? How do you go about fighting the good fight of faith? I want to be strong. I want to be strong. Let's go to another text in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4. I want you to think about the cross for a few minutes with me. I want you to examine carefully the Jesus that stood before Pilate. That Jesus who was in the judgment hall of Annas with the Sanhedrin gathered around. That Jesus that tied to a post was being thrashed and sliced and diced as the Roman centurion whipped him. That Jesus who fell carrying the post, the beam of the cross. I want you to visualize that weakness. That was the King of Kings and Lord of Lords of the universe. That was the God who could speak and 10,000 of his angels could wipe out his aggressors. I want you to think about how you approach life. How you get the things you want. How you go about managing and finding your way through this world. And I want you to ask yourself this question. Am I more like Jesus in his approach? Or more like Satan in his approach? Do I go from place to place overpowering people to get what I want? Or do I live the life of Christ? Jesus is walking up to Calvary because he's got one focused determination, and that is to get us where he is for eternity. If you flip that and see the other side of the coin where we live, he's saying, Tim Cove, live with one determination, and that is to be where he is for eternity. If we back up and we think of Jesus' perspective, he's thinking, how can I get as many of them as possible to be with me for eternity? Now we can echo that. How can I live my life in such a way that I get as many people with me and Jesus for eternity? That needs to become the one compelling focus of our lives. And that compelling focus will become a power greater than the strength of this world. Jesus, it says here, he was crucified in weakness. 2 Corinthians 13:4. He was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by the dunamis, ton theos, power of God. Where is the power of God? It is the gift of weakness. It's the life of weakness. It is setting aside power for the purpose of salvation. As it says, for we are also weak in him. When the we here, he's talking about, this is Paul talking, and he's talking about him and the leaders. And he's talking about the early church. That's us. We can relate to this. We also are weak in him. He is suggesting that when we live here in this world, we're going to get taken advantage of. And we are not to fight back and get our just due. There's too much at stake to battle for superiority, to battle for financial gain, to battle for justice in the way of the world. There's too much at stake for us to take on the weapons of the world to fight battles that we believe are God's battles. Jesus did not come here to earth and fight in the fashion of the Romans. He didn't develop a new kind of sword or scimitar. He didn't come with some type of rod that could just zap people. He came here and he fought with the weapons of the character of God. He in love stood there while Satan's forces slapped him across the face, tore out his beard. He stood there in love, determined to save the very ones that would abuse him. His strength was so amazing because it was a strength of restraint rather than a strength of aggression. Oh, this makes me weak-kneed to think of incorporating that into my life. You know, Jesus said a lot of things when he was here. He said things like, the first shall be last. Now that makes sense. See, a lover of Jesus is not going to push his way to the front of the line or the top of the heap. A lover of Jesus is going to get their stepped on. Weakness. A lover of Jesus is going to back away from the get-it-all and focus on what's truly important. A lover of Jesus is going to live for love and live for a different passion that has to do with salvation and bringing as many as possible with them. They're not going to be living for the things of this world. Those things are going to lose their flavor, their essence, their value. We also are weak in Him. That's what it means to be a Christian. Jesus said, if anyone wants to follow me, let him take up his Mercedes-Benz. Take up his cross. A cross was a symbol of shame. It was a symbol of being on the outside, unclean, unworthy, unwelcome. You can't miss the next piece here. Because this here will be followed by this here. We shall live with Him by the what? Power of God. Oh, don't be too worried, because the power of God will show up. The supernatural, omnipotent power of God will show up, but it's going to show up at a time where people have made their decision, they're taken their stand, sin has been shown for what it really is, and sin has been discarded out of the hearts of people that are dedicated to staying away from sin. And then the power of God is going to bring life to dead bodies. I know I've said this before, but maybe it's because I'm struggling with it too. This is not heaven. Jesus is not trying to make this heaven. When we pray and we ask God to take all of our problems away, He says, I can't do that. When we ask God to heal this person and save that person and avoid that and give this and fix everything, Jesus is like, I can't do that. That would be fighting with the world's weapons. That would be become a Christian for the blessings. That's not the way it is. You need to become a Christian because it's the truth. When Gandhi stood there and those smacks across his face and he was knocked to the ground and the blood is flowing, you might have thought that he'd been beaten. His followers laid bodies strewn for hundreds of feet as they're being literally hacked back, beaten back, beaten down. You'd think, well, so much for nonviolent approach. But when the world saw what happened to Gandhi, the world rallied. And the number of his followers to stand in the gap for truth multiplied. And pretty soon the power of truth was seen. Martin Luther King did not change everything in this world. What he did is he and his people stood up and they pulled this big mirror up and said, this is what's happening. And this is not truth. And as a result, how many people backed Martin Luther King? It was like it was the tide of a realization of truth that totally won the day. You have to realize that Jesus is not against us, but He's not going to take away the very things that our weakness require. Here's Paul. This is Romans chapter 1, verse 16. Paul says this, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. That was backed up by his life, wasn't it? For it is the, what do we have here? Power of God. Okay, so what is the power of God to salvation? What is the power of God to salvation? The gospel of Christ. And what is the gospel of Christ? What's the gospel? What's the gospel? All-powerful God. Tell me the rest.
He loves a simple man.
He loves the fallen. Instead of crushing him like a bug, he becomes a bug to be crushed so he could save us and bring us home. It's a reconnaissance mission. No, it's not a reconnaissance mission. It's a rescue mission. Jesus didn't come for reconnaissance. He came to rescue. The gospel is that God, who was perfect and sinless, became sin for us that we could become the glory of God. That's a verse. That's Isaiah 53. The gospel of Christ is that descent into weakness is true strength. A descent into weakness is true strength. Think about your personal life for a minute. Have you had things in your life that you've been battling against? And you've been trying to be strong? Maybe the strength that you've been trying to attain is a false strength. Maybe the real power is somewhere else. Look at this. This is Hebrews 11, verse 32 to 34. It's fantastic. The author is talking about all these great people of the past. He says, and what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Now, when we go back and we look at this list, it makes us feel puny. It just makes us feel like such failures. I mean, what Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and prophets did, those things don't happen today. They don't happen in my life. There's something interesting that each one of those individuals did that resulted in the greatness. And that was that they willingly became weak before God. This line near in 34, out of weakness were made strong. Out of weakness. Don't miss that. Out of weakness were made strong. It was when they were the weakest in the face of God that God poured the strength into their ministry. What was it that made Israel great when David came to the throne? Was it David? Was he like a super warrior? Like, did he have strategies coming out everywhere? What really made him successful in his battles? Tell me, did he really kill Goliath because he's a good shot? You see, every one of these situations, you see these people trusting and risking everything. Gideon. In blowing the horn and calling warriors, he was setting a great big target on himself. I mean, he was setting up a battle. If he just kept quiet, the Midianites would come, take the stuff, and leave the country as soon as they had taken all the food. They didn't really care about the people. They were just coming to pillage and plunder. They're like the Vikings of the old world. Okay? They didn't care about the people, as long as the people didn't revolt. But now God tells Gideon to blow a horn and call the armies. And by the way, they didn't have any weapons. I guess they were going to do some hand-to-hand combat. I don't know. Whatever. But Gideon had to completely humble himself. And then God says, you got too many men, and it goes down to 300. I mean, Gideon had to become totally weakened. And then, out of weakness, they were made strong. Maybe we're fighting this war the wrong way. This section in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 and 10 has always challenged my heart. It's always challenged my heart because it's like, man, why didn't you heal Paul? He could have done so much more for you. And I'm sure Paul was thinking the same thing. God, if you would just, and we don't know whether it was his eyesight or his, I don't know, maybe he didn't speak kind, maybe he had trouble with a relationship. I don't know what it was about Paul that he needed some healing from. My guess is that he had some sins that were besetting him. Anybody relate to that? My guess is there was some falling that he was doing, some sinning that he was doing, and he was just sure that if God would take this sin out of his life, he would be so much better off. He'd be able to really preach. He'd be able to really minister. Then he could be the super apostle that he had been called to be. If God would just take this sin, this struggle against sin out of his life, if he could take the energy he was using, struggling against the sin in his life, then he could really do something for God. And God says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take your sinful nature away, and I'm not going to stop you from being drawn to that sin. Why? Because, Paul, you need to have something that hooks you to the bottom like an anchor, and that is a realization of your weakness. See, we're totally different than Jesus. Jesus was all-powerful. He knew it, and he could handle it. And he set it to the side. The trouble is that if God gave us power, it'd be a disaster. Because you and I don't have the character to handle it. Think about some of the blessings in your life that have turned out to be curses. We all have them. We all have things in our lives that we were certain, oh, if I could just get this blessing, life will be rosy. And we realized that we weren't able to handle the blessing. Verse 9 and 10, 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And he said to me, God speaking to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. Stop trying to be perfect and realize your weakness and call out to me. My grace is sufficient. For my strength is made perfect in weakness. Think back to the cross. Where was God's strength clearly seen the best ever? When Christ was the weakest hanging on the cross. That he would let himself get to such a weak spot showed the love he has for us. It showed the passion that Satan has against the love of God. How possibly could Satan have sunk so low as to kill the innocent for the guilty? Does he not have any character? The point is, this is what sin does. The point is, this is what sin is. The point is, now you see clearly the character of God, the character of men, that would never have been shown in a battle of brute strength. There was a battle of brute strength. Maybe, somewhat, maybe philosophies, when Satan was kicked out of heaven. But when Satan was kicked out of heaven, that didn't settle the argument once and for all of who was right and who was wrong. Did it? It kind of just separated the sides into different sides of the battleground. No, it was the cross when God had taken on the weakness of sinful flesh that the true battle was won. Jesus says to Paul, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." Meaning, Paul, you're going to understand your need, and you're going to connect with the solution best when you realize how weak you are. Therefore, this is Paul's conclusion after this experience of wanting God to take away his struggles. And God says, no, it's because those struggles will keep you close to me. Therefore, Paul says, most gladly will I rather boast in my infirmities. Paul was glad to have those weaknesses because they were his salvation, in that they kept him connected to Jesus. What does it say? I boast in my infirmities that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities. Now, that's kind of weird because it's kind of makes it sound like he's glad when he sins. No. When he sins, he is in best touch with a Savior. Guys, here's the thing I want you to understand. When you sin and you're disappointed and discouraged in yourself, when you feel like going far from Jesus, when you realize that your mouth says things and your heart thinks things and your mind hungers for things that are wrong and you feel low, realize that at that moment, Christ is not looking at you with disdain. He's looking at you with love. And if that doesn't break your heart, nothing will. Is this connecting with your hearts a little bit? When you are struggling, realize that that links you in weakness when Christ was in weakness. And look across at the cross to him and realize that he is saying, I know. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. Don't dare say, oh God, I can't hook with you because I'm such a mortified, total wreck. Jesus is like, no, you don't realize. I came down to your level so that we could link and I could take you back with me out of sin. In verse 10 it says, therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distress, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, strength, it's not what you think it is. It's not the absence of troubles. It's not the superior fighting power. It's not the being able to push everybody around. It's not like a football game where strength isn't pushing the opposition down and running over them. It's not like that at all. It doesn't even go into the football field. There's no analogy there like this one. This would be like the strength of the quarterback taking the ball and putting himself in a place where there can be like an opposition pig pile on him and he comes out with multiple broken bones. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense in the football game. But you have to understand that God works in a totally different place. I challenge you today to tell something about yourself. I challenge you today. Tell God something about yourself that He doesn't know. Just try it. Try convincing God that you are the horrible, rotten, no good, lost individual that you feel like sometimes. Try to surprise God with some secret sin you haven't quite talked to Him about. You can't. You can't. You can't. And He hasn't run away from you yet. He won't ever. It's like you can look upon the blackest, rottenest, negativest, darkest, destructive event in your life, your own choice, and you can feel like you are a million miles from God, but I'm guarantee you, when you look away from that sin, you're going to see Jesus with His arms open wide. And He's going to say, I'm here for you. I'm right here. And you're going to be like, what? Like the prodigal son, he comes home. And this is what he says. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. How many of us could say that to God? And it would be true. I'm no longer worthy to be anything to you, God. It would be okay for you to just call them to stone me. What does God say back? What does Jesus say back? Yeah, in the story, the father says, here's the family ring, which would be a symbol of, no. You're my son. You're my daughter. I'm honored to have you as my heir. You know, you ever have somebody with you and you go and you're meeting up with other people and you're almost a little embarrassed to introduce this person to them? Have you ever been in that situation? Where you're kind of thinking of yourself and thinking of this person and you don't even like this person, you're just with this person. It's like, well, yeah, and this is not my friend. I don't know, he's kind of stutter and stammer. Well, can you imagine throughout eternity, Jesus, when we go with Him to places, He's going to go, this is my daughter. This is my girl. And He's going to have a smile on His face as though we're the best thing since sliced bread. And I'm sure there's a lot of better things than sliced bread. But we're the best thing in God's eyes. This is my boy. Have you ever introduced your kids to people and your chest pumps out? It's like, this is my boy. This is my girl. You're so proud of them. God's going to have that same feeling when He introduces us in heaven. Today, if you feel condemned, if you feel weak, look around and you'll see Jesus allowing the weakness of sin, allowing sin to bring Him to a place where He is so weak that He can be killed. And realize that He did that for you. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, I don't understand. In a lot of ways, it just doesn't make sense to me. Why you would do what you did. How you would be so willing to take upon yourself the consequences of my short-sighted, destructive activities. But today you want to tell me. You want to tell all of us that in our weakest moments, we can lay hold of the strengths of the universe. And that nothing, neither height nor depth, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, that nothing in all creation can separate us from your love. That in weakness, that's where we'll find the true strength. Thank you. We pray this in Jesus' name.